I'll show you a little start of a self. That's me as a baby, but this is a self-portrait. See, there's my hair in there. And I'll sculpt around that. I'll sculpt around it. I got eyes, glass eyes. I put up here as a third eye, and horns and arms. So I'm going to make like 9 self-portraits. I don't know. I have no idea why, but yeah, it's my hair.
Do you think that it's a good way of having a time capsule just in case something happens to you?
Yes. I imagine I love to embed my DNA in things, and I think, boy, wouldn't it be great if someone could clone me? And if they actually clone me, I actually come back and I realize that I've been cloned. Like, I'm like, holy shit. Like, like cryogenics, how they freeze a body and think they can bring it back. Well, that would be the test of the spirit, right? They clone someone and you're like, they clone a human being finally, not just this sheep. And you're like, holy shit, I've been here before. This is me, like, wow, how weird, how cool. Yeah, so yeah, it's a time cap. Yeah.
So I have a childhood photo of you as well here. So if you send me your hair and maybe a couple fingernails, and I put these all away in a cryo vault, I'm sure the Silicon Valley has one somewhere.
Right.
If I decided to do that and then I cloned you, do you want young Shane to know that you are a clone?
Well, I wonder if he would. What if you wake and you're like, hey, I've been here before? Like, it's almost like reincarnate. Yes, I would. I don't mind. I don't know. Maybe at that time, there'll be psychological studies saying, don't let them know. But I don't, yeah, it's cool. The whole fucking thing is cool. If you can bring someone back, like, regenerate them, repopulate them. I also imagine my sculptures floating in space, like,
like the bone floating around on 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
Ba ba ba, Bugby.
I'm gonna send
Bugby.
Now I'm gonna have to send you a jar with my hair and whatever else in there. What else did you ask for? Fingernails?
I don't know if they need. Do you know what? Fingernails and hair are very similar materials. I think that hair probably is the most sanitary and easiest way to keep around. You should have also a set of instructions, just in case something happened to you, what you would like the clone to know, what you don't want them to know, all these things. So, just like raising a child, ideally, a parent would want to try a little harder with the next generation. Give them what they couldn't have.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to make a zine that goes around with these 9. That's a great idea. I'll make a little zine, like like this is my Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to make a zine with this.
Perhaps each zine, as a suggestion, what if there were different editions that could be collected? And they're different alternative versions of young Shane. Maybe consult with different friends. Maybe have one consultation per 9 friends, and then have different versions based on the influence by those people. If they come from different walks of life and they raised young Shane clone, they would all turn out differently.
Oh, God, this is a great collab. This is great.
Or it could almost be like a choose your own adventure. Do you want Shane to go to public school or private school?
I love this.
Do you want Shane to learn the cello, or do you want him to just learn the drums and bang out his feelings?
I love this. I love this. I love this. Are we recording?
We sure are.
Oh, that's wonderful. This is good stuff to have on record, maybe. I have to ask you, you sent me some music to sleep to.
Yes.
And I wonder, do you think music rewires the brain in a healthy and unhealthy way?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I don't think that necessarily Mozart makes your children smart, but I think that just allowing your children to listen to music through sleep, or even playing music for animals and plants, is something that helps just generally for well-being. But I think it does, sort of like dreaming and sleep, it does help you process in a nonverbal way, I believe.
Well, I will tell you, the last 3 or 4, whatever, however, maybe 3 days ago, you sent it to me 2 days ago. I've listened to it, and I've had a hard time sleeping, or I've woken with anxiety attacks and nightmares sometimes. but it has really helped. And I really do feel like it helps me rebound from the anxiety attacks faster. It's almost like a form of meditation,
I could see
uh,
that. And
so it's been nice. And I've slept the last 2 days. I have slept a lot. And, I take that as a good thing because I need to sleep, so.
I think that that particular piece, set of pieces, if you're wondering what we're talking about, it's Glen Gould's recordings of the Goldberg variations by Bach. And these were actually a commissioned set of work. Uh, the patron who commissioned Bach to compose them's last name was Goldberg. That's why they're called the Goldberg variations. And there's some speculation that it was a rich kid because some historical records have seen that the patron was about 14 years old. So some hype beast hired Bach. Hey guys, I gotta get some sleep, so I'm gonna call my boy Bach and get some pieces written. So basically, Bach dropped some beats and gave him what is basically original and remix set of 30 plus piece variations of the same piece. And some of them are so similar to each other that sometimes I lose track listening to it. And so I honestly think that making someone watch a performance of this is almost like it might be a great way to like pickpocket people because I love Bach, but I cannot stay awake or pay attention listening to this. So it is a good set of pieces to process.
It's
Go to
working for
sleep.
me. And when I thought about what you said, I challenge it. Like I do everything out of a skeptic, want to prove it wrong. So you're saying I'll put this to sleep and I'll see about that. And the first song is real mellow, and then the second one's louder.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of jars me. But I turned it down. I started on the second song and turned it down to a volume that won't bother me. And then I start the first song. So it slowly works into it. But then I thought about it. I was like, well, boy, I wonder if this is rewiring me in a way, in a healthy way, versus like going to sleep with death metal on, war music. Death metal's like war music. And, that's the fact. I mean, they use that in war today. They'll put on Pantera or some death metal and blow up a village. Awful to say, but that's true. So I think, boy, I used to listen to so much death metal to make myself feel better. But I think it was just to get out some sort of aggression, some aggro rock, whatever.
I think that also the recording itself, Glen Gould has a tendency of having a slightly inconsistent touch on the piano, but that was also that was recorded during a time period where ribbon mics were used to record pianos, so they're very hot mics. So I almost wonder if there's a normalized or remastered version of that same recording. Because I think that it needs a slight compression to it, just on a sound engineering standpoint. And I think that it needs to be remastered, so perhaps I should make a remastered version and just do it. I'll have my Nannerl's bootleg copy of the Goldberg variations, because fuck you, Glen Gould. Why don't you press less hard? We're trying to sleep. Close your legs and your piano, Glenn. We're trying to sleep.
Whoa. Close your legs, Glenn.
There are some recordings of him that I really like that he hums to himself. He doesn't do it in this recording, but there are seriously some recordings that he's just do 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 on the piano and go and I mean, I tap my foot when I play music. I kind of make noises to myself too, but Jesus Christ, dude, you're recording.
Right. That's funny. I'd love to hear your bootleg. That would be great.
I'll do it. I'll have slight noises in the background too, as if I recorded it.
Even though I thought when I did that, I thought when I set it to the second song, which is a louder one, I thought it was a nice, like, it brings you, it's bringing my subconscious into it versus my conscious ear. It's there's a slightness and it builds. So I don't know what I'm saying about audio manipulation. I just know that I feel like it is empirical truth that it might help you in a healthy way and music might help you in an unhealthy way.
Maybe it also changes the subject in your brain. Like, okay, show's over, time to change the channel kind of way.
Ooh, nice. Oh, nice. I have been having a lot of dreams lately. As you know, you've interpreted some of
Mm-hmm.
them. And anyway, I don't want to get into my dreams. People interpret them.
This podcast is based around the history and experiences of the infamous Shane Bugbee, recollected and retold by Shane Bugbee himself. Who is Shane? Well, you're about to find out. I'm your host, Nannerl, and this is Speak of the Devil. So last episode, we talked about My Cunt, Your Cunt, My Cunt Publishing. Now, we're talking about another word that starts with V. V is for validation. What is validation to you?
Boy, I'm not. I don't know. To be honest with you, it's such a. This is a subject that you brought into that you wanted to talk about, and I thought about it in just a way of like peer pressure or fitting in to a crowd. Let's say, how do you feel valid? Like when we talk about, you call them kickwear pants, I think, but like parachute pants, or that's what I immediately thought of when you brought up validation. And then as I started to think about what I'm setting up for this recording session, I thought about the adult me and how I might feel, what would make me feel valid as a human being. And I think credit, where credit is due, is part of that in a reasonable way. In an unreasonable way, it's love and being loved. Physical contact, sex, is validation to me. But not sex as in cold, mechanical sex, but I'm talking lovemaking, passionate lovemaking. That to me is validation, or very heated sex, let's say horny sex, if it's not lovemaking, but it's just really hot. There's warmth to it, not cold. That to me feels like the ultimate in validation. And maybe there's a psychological problem with me that I'm validated that way.
It
Or
sounds quite
maybe,
primal.
yeah, I was going to say maybe it's something from birth where that's the only validation that ever exists is in the womb or in the warmth of a womb or physical contact. I don't just want to, give the womb all the credit. But yeah, I think that's how I feel like validation is for me today as I look at things in a very base way. I'm not into, I see success as something that is very individually defined. And so, success is something after an accomplishment. Society can't define success. It does, and I think in a very perverse way, where we keep climbing this fake ladder of success. It's with capitalism and stuff like that. And within that, you buy new shoes. You keep struggling for this commercial or physical, or not physical, but this commercial kind of, you can buy
Like a
validation.
tangible form of validation, like a prize or a trophy.
Right, but I don't think it's true, actually. I think it's very empty. I think the only thing I can feel right now is validation through warmth, human warmth. And it's sex to me, but I would say the lick of a dog, friendship of a dog. I'm not really into children as far as appreciating them too much. But I suppose the same with a dog. Like I guess I'm getting to know my nephew. And he's like 2 years old, and he stays far away from me usually. He looks at me and runs because he's afraid of me. And I don't go, hey, let's play. I'm like, yeah, please do run. But the other day I was over there, and he brought me his blanket and handed it to me and ran away. And I'm like, oh, this is just like a dog. I could relate to the kid as a dog. Like, that's what dogs do when they want to make friends. They bring you their bone and they give it to you. And so I'm like, okay, that's validation to me. The 2-year-old decided to not be afraid, but try to be friendly with me. And he brought me his blanket. And therefore I was like, hey, I smiled at him. I said, that's very nice. You have a nice blanket, as I would a dog. Very nice. Rubbed him on the head like a dog. I treat the kid like a dog, which I treat dogs like kids. I mean, I don't treat dogs that much different than human beings. I'm an animal lover and treat them as equals. And so there you go. There's my idea of validation.
I think dogs actually give a very true and not really true, pure, a pure form of validation, not just to themselves, but to us. And their lives exist in the form of validation. Even pack mentality of wild dogs, they validate the alpha, they validate each other. And if you fuck up, you're no longer valid. You're on your own, bitch. Or dog. And I think that looking how dogs behave, we're not very different as people. You know, whether it's money, sex, prizes, you know, things from each other, pats on the back from coworkers or peers. It's a very similar form, and we tend to receive more validation the higher up the mountain we climb.
Hmm. Well, okay. I'm not sure. I'm
The
not sure. I'm not sure. I don't know about that. I don't know.
well, what
It's
about it
interesting.
is different from what you think?
Well, because I just I look at society's form of validation as very impure, very perverse. And so the pack mentality, the peer pressure or the crowd is very perverse. It's like everyone's on stage. There's not an intimacy to it. And I think amongst a pack of dogs, there's an intimacy to it. In the wild, there's an intimacy that we don't have. When we climb the ladder that we're climbing now, I don't know if it's as intimate. That's why I go to sex or the primal stuff.
Perhaps the
But
way that human interaction is the inverse of how dogs are.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I would see it, I guess. Because I'm a person who's been shunned and pushed out of packs here and there, and I never see it as justified. And I can be pretty, I can take an accounting of my actions and go, oh, I guess I deserve that. But I honestly don't feel I've deserved a lot of it. I think it's been based on perverse things, not my accomplishments, but my threat of taking someone's status. My threat, the short guy here, the short fat guy is going to beat the tall strong man in let's say my soda company. I'm going to beat out the local businesses
This
and
podcast is going to beat out a bunch of mouth breathers in San Francisco.
other pot. Yes, right, because there's a genuineness to it. I think part of validation in the truest sense, in the empirical sense, is there is that genuine nature. There's an honesty to it. There's a primal to it. There's a primal thing to it. And so I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That's a
That's
really
Do you know what
intense.
though? What you're saying about the unjust shunnings or being pushed out of the pack, I think that a lot of people can relate to that, and that's been seen time after time in history. And the idea of the validation given to the more powerful or creating these more powerful people for one's own gain or whatever, you know, it's part of our politics. I think of Caesar, sort of like Caesar mentalities. Ancient Rome even had this. Um, Literature, movies have it from different time periods. And so it does make me feel a little more secure in saying that perhaps human nature is the inverse of a pack's nature.
Yeah. I remember I went and saw a Darwin exhibit at a museum, and there was a very slight sentence about a gentleman. I looked him up, and what I looked up was Darwin basically ripped off his theories from someone else that was 10 years prior to him. That's what at least I read, something like that. And so I was like, how odd that this person wouldn't get credit. The same with the beat poets. That's a culture that I know. I'm a that I know the culture that I exist or grow out of, and so the beat poets and stuff. I know that Neil Cassidy is the root of it all. He's the nucleus, but he didn't get any credit. You know, died drunk on railroad tracks, never got credit, but he was what they all ripped off. They were like his beat, his pulse, his rhythm. That's what they all. I shouldn't say ripped off, but they were all inspired by it. But the inspiration for it didn't get the credit. The rich kids did, the intellectuals did, or the formally educated and rich kids got the credit. And I always saw that as just so perverse in so many ways. I felt like I was robbed as a person. Like, you mean I was reading the people who are mimicking the original? I want to study the original and all the variations of the original, certainly. But why was the original written out of history? Like, totally ignored and written out of history. That's a fraud in the storytelling lineage. So I just always been upset by that. So, you know, but maybe Neil Cassidy eventually gets his justification or his due, and the person that Darwin ripped off somewhere along the line gets the validation you're talking about.
Look at Ghost. King Diamond has been doing this far
Yeah,
longer.
yeah. And they make a ton of, they're just really, they got a Grammy, I guess. They're the biggest band that I hear. I don't know. They're out of my generation, but yeah, exactly.
A lot of times credit where credit is due it can make or break someone. You can get stuck on it, or you can continue to pursue better validations. Look for the bigger picture. Do you feel like you've done one or the other more in life?
Well, I certainly keep struggling to evolve and climb my own uh, enlightenment. So I think I've done both, and I look back and recognize, well, that was a mistake, and I could admit it. I try to admit it and say, okay, move along. Mistakes are lessons to me, so they're not a loss. It's not a minus to me. A mistake is a plus to me as long as I learn from it and I change it. And so, yeah, I've done both, certainly. But I think I do more of the quest for answers in my artwork, answers of who and what I am and where I fit in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's when I spoke, I think the last episode we spoke about some stuff, and I think that there's an overwhelming thing that people pay attention to themselves. I'm first. We'll look out for number one. And I don't think you can do that until you figure out where you fit in the grand scheme of things. And I think people have it backwards. They think as long as I look out for number one, I'll get the job that I deserve versus the job I'm made for, or the role in life I'm made for. How can I fit into the all and therefore benefit the all and then find myself? And so I've slowly worked at figuring out where I fit into the all. And now I'm able to deal with the self. And I think, yes, I've had a struggle with that throughout my life. Certainly, when you read in a philosophy like LaVey's, you can misinterpret that stuff, I think. You know, that stuff's left up in all books. Most books are left up to interpretation. And so, yeah. I don't need to keep rambling, saying the same thing.
Do you think others need others to be validated?
Well, no, I don't. I think you need to feel it within yourself, but I think you need to fit into the all somehow. You know, you need to. We all coexist. This is the big planet here. You know, this little the great blue dot or whatever Sagan calls it. And I think universally we fit in. So when the concept of we're made of stardust comes up, that's a trip. And so we are part of this all that's huge, amazingly big. You know, so yes, you do have to have validation from the all. I don't think you need to be pat on the back from everyone around necessarily to feel good about yourself. So where I fit in where I'm starting to understand where I fit in as an artist and an outspoken person. That's a lonely road. And you're right, in history, a lot of people have taken it. And now that I feel that and I can understand that, I'm more comfortable with myself. And I'm not as angry as people for maybe not understanding me or not understanding what I do. I'm not as upset when people call me names. I can shrug them off as I would have went to war with them prior because I understand where I fit into the all.
I think that self-actualization has helped you with your career as well. You're still an artist full time. Your your life is built on art and what you've done for yourself, but you've also realized where you fit in the world. I think that you take care to respect where you fit and how you fit, and you don't try to fit your piece into a spot that it doesn't fit in. You work with it, and it's kept you alive. It's kept a roof over your head. You don't live with your parents. You don't collect anything from anyone. You don't owe anyone anything. And I think that's a good example of self-validation, even though I'm validating it right now.
That's something. There's something to be said for that. I wouldn't be ashamed if I had to live with a family member, though. I I have thought of that, and it's not easy to make a living as an artist or an outspoken person that deals with Satanism and really heavy subjects like I do that are not acceptable in polite society, as they would say. It's not an easy road, and I do depend on patrons and supporters and stuff like that. So it's not like I've done well at the stock market where I'm independently wealthy, and that's the validation society offers. And for me, I'm like, oh, gross. I don't. That does that. That makes that makes alcohol appealing to me because I would have to drink my way through that life, even though I know I have the wits to deal with, like, let's say I could go be a trader, a stock market trader, a drug dealer, whatever, sell flesh, whatever, pornography. I could do those things. It just doesn't fit me as the where I fit in the world. But you're like, I'm able, like, as a person, I visit all those spots and try to see if I fit in, or like when the interviews, I go to places and say, hey, what's going on here, and sniff it out. And I don't know. I've been lucky to find my place in the all, I feel. And I think most people are lost, and that's where drug addiction and alcoholism and heavy abuse comes from, is just not fitting in. Even though they got a great job, they're like, I'm making $100,000 a year as a plumber, but they drink themselves to sleep, and they beat their kids, or their their idea of a good time is watching movies on the TV, not going outside, stuff like that. Not living a
Hey,
life.
hey, hey, hey,
What?
hey.
What?
We don't always have to go outside to have a good time.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Have a good time with the mate. You're right. You're right about that. I'm a shut in myself. I shouldn't say that, but I think you know what I'm saying. Like, they get their fun out of something else besides themselves, like hanging out with their mate, a dinner with their lover. Those things inside, right? Making pasta for your lover. Uh,
What are you
I,
talking about? Making pasta for myself.
but you must share it with, you must have,
Of course. Of course. And perhaps that's my validation of what I made. I could not, I couldn't possibly make food only for myself. I feel like I do thrive from that validation of someone else enjoying what I made. I think, you definitely can't knock anything until you've tried it. And I think part of finding your place in the world is saying, hey, what's going on over here? Try it out. Doesn't work for you, you move on from it. I think that doing the exact opposite of feeling like, oh, those people look like dickbags, and then not even trying it, not even seeing if they're dickbags or not, can sometimes hurt your own. It can hurt your own ego because your ego is getting the best of you, but also, you never know. Those dickbags might be good people. Those dickbags might be the ones who pick you up when you got a flat tire. Those dickbags might have your back 10 years from now. So might have a place in their world. You might have a place, you might feel like their world has a spot just waiting for you. Maybe you're one of the dickbags too.
That's so true. That's why I do those interviews, though. That's why I've, seek out people that are very different than me to talk to. It's very true, you know.
I feel like some of my closest friends and the ones who have always been there for me are definitely not cut from the same cloth. And I wouldn't have known that if I didn't give those people a chance. Half of my closest friends from 10 plus years ago, we had the biggest fight ever within months of meeting each other. And that was pretty much validation that we can stick it out. We're still friends. And, sometimes the fights, I don't even remember half these fights. But they came out in the open because, I was young and cocky and they're 10 years my senior or whatever. And they'd, hey, you can't do that. And I say, hey, I can do whatever I want. And they're like, no, you can't. And here's why. And then, it helped me calm down. It helped me learn and basically help myself learn how to find my place in the world. It would have been harder without those people calling my ass out. That little sting was way better than, a larger scar.
And those were people that were not cut from the same cloth, correct?
Correct.
Right. And I think like the suburban mentality that I think of is that you stick with people that are of the same cloth and you never grow. You just sit at, now that I'm back in the city that is my dirt, where I was born in Lubbock, Texas, but where I was raised I'm a Chicagoan. Now that I'm back here and I visit my, for lack of a better word, my kin, my family, and my old friends, I see that a lot of them can't get past, let's say, juvenile behavior. Let's say, just there's a lot more alcoholism. There's a lot more of that weird behavior because they just can't break. Like, this is how I was at 21 or 25. And we're all like that. So they all get together and they just do the same shit, drink beers, and do the same things that they did 25 years ago since I've seen them. And it's like, oh wow, I don't want to, like, oh, I feel bad for you. Like, I feel bad for you that you still live in that same life. I got to see the world. Like, I got around. Like, and I plan on seeing the world and the rest of my, like, I probably will live and die a struggling artist, but I'm definitely going to be working to get opportunities to get out of Chicago and travel the country, travel the world even. I wouldn't want to stay and do the same things I did 25 years ago, with the people that of the same cloth. And I think you're right. When you get outside of your circle, people challenge you, or you're challenged by how they live. Like, oh, you eat kale? Like they're, like I come back here and I'm like, people somewhat make fun of me because I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for something green when we eat. And just fucking straight meat diets, meat and potatoes.
Meat and potatoes. Vegetables are for women.
Yeah, right. Vegetables, right. So I'm very petite. I'm very petite now. Like,
look at Hollywood with his kale.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, big deal. Mr. Big Deal has to have a salad with his. Yeah, I do. I actually do. So yeah. Or I said, what did I say the other day? I said, I had a word that I used. Maybe I said commingle, or I said something, and they're like, "Oh, commingle!" Like it was a big word, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, I gotta get the fuck out of here."
You go a little farther east, and you get what you think you're better than us.
Yeah,
as
right.
the response to something like that.
Right. It's weird. It's weird. It's weird. It's weird, especially because of the internet and how we're all connected now. Yet, there's so many people that have been born on the internet that's a whole region. The internet is its own region of the world. And then you go regionally in the United States and you find people are very different than the region of the internet where there's a political correctness happening. There's a debate going on about how to treat people. Living in the Pacific Northwest, regionally, people were very different than they are regionally in Chicago and the Midwest. But I thought after living in the Pacific Northwest for, 13 years or so, that we've all changed to the internet region and we're all hip to this new way of communicating. But no,
Portland and San Francisco mentalities.
right, which I love. Versus, I get the extreme and I get how silly they can be, but versus the Midwest, the brutal ignorance here, the brutal. Don't be politically correct. Don't be a pussy. Don't be so sensitive. Like
Or the like blatant need to be unpolitically correct just to prove a point.
oh, and I had said some things, and I was like, well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend your whatever. I said some stuff, and they're like, you got to get back to Chicago, man. You got to not give a fuck. You got to, and I'm like, really? And because I was talking about like the Me Too movement or how I see things now versus I said something like that makes me uncomfortable. What you said, I said something about their neighbor, a person of color, and I was like, and they weren't out it was racist, but it was like an ignorant racist. It was like a joke that was from the 80s or some shit. It was like, oh God, let's get over this, okay?
Mm.
And I was like, I'm uncomfortable that you said that. And they're like, oh, come on, you're back in Chicago. You got to quit giving a fuck so much. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's ever going to happen because this has been impressed upon me and I happen to agree with it. This is, I didn't accept everything that happened in the Pacific Northwest as something that I was happy with, but this is what I feel is correct. These are my politics. This is my philosophy in life, you know. And so it was weird how they equate like you got to not give a fuck. I'm like, no, actually, you got to give a fuck a lot. Like, you know.
Do you know what? I think that people in cities like Portland and in parts of Silicon Valley also sometimes they feel like, well, you gotta not give a fuck. And they'll say the same things, but it's oftentimes a very different form of it. I heard a lot of that actually within the first year I lived here. I pointed out to friends who were not of Japanese descent over that there's far more colorism in this area and far more classism between Japanese people because of the climate of what kind of people work here versus the kind of people who live in, say, Los Angeles or who used to live in Chicago. And I'm on the lower end of the totem pole in this area, and it was a huge shock to me, and it was amazing how many American people, like when I say American, what I mean is not Japanese and regardless of race, but it's told me that, oh, well, you need to learn how to not give a fuck. You need to learn how to be yourself and da 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 da, which was a completely unhelpful, like worse than mom advice kind of advice. But I think that rather than trying to show how hard you were, I think that it came from a place of self-absorbedness that this Pacific Northwest and Silicon Valley tends to have is this idea of self-validation and self-absorbedness, because remember, this is also the areas that the ideals of self-esteem came from in the 70s.
Oh, really?
A lot of early psychology comes from parts like San Francisco and Marin County and stuff. Remember that people like Ram Dass come from here. And so I think that a lot of these ideas of self-esteem, feel, validation, things like that are normal to us now in 2019, they are rooted in these areas. And so for those reasons, I think a lot of Americans who are raised in this area don't even realize how rude they're being when they say that, much like Chicagoans may not realize that how they're speaking comes off as slightly rude when they're saying, you need to learn how to not give a fuck, because they're saying the same thing, just involving a different thing. And it is sort of interesting that Chicago, you've mentioned how everyone will pick each other up if they fall over. You look at each other in the eyes. It's, as a collective, you don't give a fuck as the group, as the pack. Whereas out here, you have you have sort of a lone wolf, but it's not really, it's more like a solipsist mentality, which is something that actually LaVey could not stand. And there's a lot of individualism, but it's like collectively individual. Everyone is so into themselves and feeling like, well, you have to be proud of who you are because everyone looks the same. And of course they're proud of who they are because they're all still within that
The
group
box.
mentality.
See.
Yes, but they're rather more like a herd of herbivores versus the pack of wolves in Chicago or Jersey or Philly or Boston, etc. So it's a very, to me, it's a very interesting duality that it's the same but different.
That is really cool insight. There's something that, that's really cool.
What about seeking validation within the career?
That's a whole different thing, isn't it? So for me, that's what I struggle at all the time as an artist for certain, and as an older artist, I guess. I've only realized, I'm 50, and I've only realized at 50 that I'm old. Like when you say the word 50, you're like, huh, I don't feel that. Like I don't feel it. And some of it has to do with what they call a learning disability, like ADHD or Asperger's, where I just have this youthful mindset, this wondrous curiosity that's probably never going to go away. If I live to 80, I'll always be like this. And I love that. I love that curious nature. But as far as career validation, it's like, how the fuck do I get into a gallery when it's a bunch of rich kids from art school and I'm
And they're
not?
half your age.
Yeah, and okay, and that too. Like
And they were born eating kale, so they're really skinny.
oh yeah, right. Well, that too. So it's like, how do I get in? How do I get in? And I feel like I can compete with them and dominate as far as a creative person because I've done it for, if they're a 30-year-old, I've done this for 30 fucking years, kid. I'm a master. I'm a master sculptor. I'm a master at some of the stuff I do. Like I can nail it. And I have proven myself in many forms. Like I can just pick up, I can watch someone, whatever they're doing, whatever art, whatever medium they're doing, I could watch them for a day and then do exactly what they're doing and better. So I can compete on that very trivial, visceral, that weird way, the societal way. But I want to know, how do I compete? And the Unabomber talks about a lot of this, like, hey, which I really liked reading his manifesto because of that. He talks about how the scales have been tilted. There's no ladder to climb. It's all nepotism and wealth, and that's that. And so it is upsetting to seek validation in a career when there's not honesty in the art world. Let's say there's not a lot of honesty. It's people think that you can steal things and become things, and it's that genuine, the genuine person who created the trend doesn't get his credit, doesn't get their credit, her credit, its credit. And so validation within a career is a real hard thing, and it's a great struggle. How I've been validated is people have seen what I've done and chose to interview or chose to give me credit. Because my career is overwhelming, it's hard to ignore it. Or it's so overwhelming, they like with the TST or something, they have to ignore it because, much like you say, what have they done? What have they done? In comparison, what have they done? And so the natural validation that I feel versus the perverse validation in society is a torturous thing. It can be torturous because it's like, man, I'm outperforming you in so many ways, except like you say, being born in the right zip code, being skinny, being healthy like that, being mentally healthy even. They exceed me in those things. But I don't know. Career validation's rough. What would you say?
I completely agree. As a classically trained musician, I've faced very similar things. I was always the poor kid in competitions as a kid. Going through my career, going through college, I was always the poorest one. I had the shittiest instrument until I was in my 20s, and even so, I was lent an instrument out of pity from a shop, and then saved up for something that just wasn't good enough. And that feeling of, it was almost like that feeling of sexual inadequacy that someone would have. It was a very similar feeling, and it was yet again another hurdle to go against. While music is talent based, there is a shitload of nepotism. And there's also, you have to be cut from a certain cloth because unfortunately, music is a luxury career. It was not made for people like me. I think my parents also realized this, and perhaps they tried to hold me back from having a career in it because they were afraid. Who knows? But I know that a lot of my peers in school were hardly my peers because, they had instruments lent to them from societies, which means that these are instruments that are worth over $100,000, that are intrinsically and historically valuable, and they're often lent to musicians who don't even really need the financial need for them. And every once in a while, you get a hood kid who's incredibly talented and taken under someone's wing and helped. And when that happens, I feel like we all win. I feel like when I see someone get a better opportunity than I had and additional help, it makes me feel amazing. If I ever am able to help, say, students or any younger musicians that I know are having a hard time and I have the means to lend them an instrument or give them some good advice because I believe in them, I just do it. Because I feel like, much like your clones, this is sort of my chance of letting the newer generation have a better leg up than I did. And I find that a lot of those people do get ahead of life even farther, and oftentimes the validations that they receive, they don't necessarily need it. If you
Right.
look at it from the people who are not getting that pat on the head. But here's what I have found that I'm sure is incredibly parallel to your career. The victories that I've had are not necessarily the front page of the internet. The victories I've had were very small, individualized support, much like patrons. A lot of commissioned work where I worked on commission and basically was paid for the use of my work, however someone deemed useful, and it's no longer mine when the transaction is made. I basically sold my rights to something. But those rights sold, even though I don't collect royalties from half of them, they still got me ahead in life. I was able to say, hey, I recorded with this person. I gained a lot of skills working with engineers who recorded me or taught me how to accommodate recordings away from a studio, especially moving out of Los Angeles. I was able to find ways to continue as a commissioned cellist and continue where I don't have to necessarily dress like a penguin with the other penguins in a fucking, a concert hall and play the same music the way that someone else deems it fit, not necessarily my own way. And I'm not shitting on classical music because it's my bread and butter, but at the same time, it is like a corporate job. It is like a Wall Street sort of job. You have to play the ponies. You gotta slick back your hair. You gotta wear the suit. You gotta dress the same way as each other in order to survive in that. But I had to find my place in music. How could I make this for myself and where do I fit? And this comes from, I come from a generation of musicians before tattoos were as acceptable as they are now. Now you have chicks with wrist tattoos all over the place. Girls with purple hair come to their rehearsals. Girls with a little bit brighter hair. And I was told from day one, you cover that shit up, you play the game. And so if you look for me in any orchestra pictures from 10 plus years ago, you probably will not find me because I've got a wig on. And I look very dull. I blend in the crowd because that was the game I had to play to get ahead. I wasn't allowed the luxury of being, someone with a line of product, endorsement, blah, 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 because my parents had the trust fund or my father was a musician or something like that. And so, much like you, I had to carve my own niche. And, you have your patrons. And patronage is not always in front for everyone to see. Some patrons are never with a name. You can't necessarily always give the credit to patrons, depending on what the situations are. And it's the same way for myself as well. But I think that it's one of those sort of intimate things, kind of like sex. Sex can create this form of validation that's very intimate. It's between you and whoever was involved, and oftentimes no one else will know. And
Right.
I think that that feeling of value and intimacy within a career as an artist is incredibly intimate. It's not always on YouTube and, hey guys, and you're in, what is the illusion of success.
Right. That illusion of success. I was right. I thought about this, like accomplishment is something you feel after a struggle. That's a true feeling of success. Like, wow, I've mastered this. And so I think that maybe people like ourselves that have to struggle through multiple struggles to get to an accomplishment feeling have it better off when we have a success. Like it's felt versus a person who comes from nepotism. Like, oh, my mom was in galleries, I'm in galleries. It becomes such a boring life. They don't really ever feel success, even though in society they're doing everything right for their CV. It looks successful. But when you have a whole lineage that's went to Harvard and your father paid for a library at Harvard and you graduate from Harvard, what a boring life it is. Versus breaking the ties of that and doing something different like yourself or myself. I'm very different than the plumber stock that I was born into.
I find very relatable success stories of artists who got out of the hood. I'm using that cliche again, but sort of, I feel like those cliches are very important to me because they're alternate versions of what could have been. It could have been worse, and obviously other people did it too. Obviously these people, met a lot of luck, but they still are immensely talented people who had a lot of gumption and, for lack of a better word, might to get ahead.
Yeah, very true.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and tune in to our next episode wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. You can find us at Speak of the Devil Pod on Twitter and contact us at speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com. For Shane's artwork or to support his endeavors, please visit shanebugby.com or find him on Twitter at ShaneBugby. I've been Nannerl. Have a good one.
Oh, and shaneisthedevil.com.